Okay, so where to begin? I think we'll begin with a koan, just for laughs and giggles. And the koan is one that it's come up before. It's one that I in here in Mumonkan, so many of you have encountered it. And it's called Ketchu Makes Carts. And the case is Master Gaitan asked a monk, Ketchu made 100 carts. If he took off both wheels and removed the axle, what would he make clear about the cart? If he took off both wheels and removed the axle, what would he make clear about the cart? And this koan is talking about our essential nature and the relationship between our sort of ordinary everyday being and our essential nature, which is not exactly the context I'm bringing it up in today, but it's much in parallel to it, which is I'm continuing to work on this question of what is Zen and what is Zen in the 21st century. And I've brought this up before, and I'm bringing it up again because I think I actually have sort of a breakthrough with it, and that's the piece I want to share with you later. But the fundamental question, what is Zen? It's a really interesting one, and I'm going to propose that in the next 2 weeks we watch 2 videos. One of which I've mentioned before is called Amongst the White Clouds. And I'm suggesting we're going to watch this together in lieu of the Dharma talk next week. And then discuss it. It's fairly long. It's about 1 hour and 22 minutes. We may or may not watch the whole thing, but then we'll take some time for discussion afterwards. What's Amongst the White Clouds? Well, it's a description, not a description, it's a depiction. It is the life of a group of Buddhist monks who live in the remote mountains of China and who practice Zen. These are Zen Buddhist monks practicing a form of Zen that's not often seen in the world today. Certainly not, maybe not any place else in the world today, but it is in these mountains. And it's a beautiful documentary. I just looked at it again. It's been, I think, I first encountered it maybe 10 years ago, and it's, I think it's been evolving. I think they've been redoing portions and making it cinematically better. And the other one is a lecture by Red Pine. So Red Pine is a fellow named Bill Porter, and he is a Taoist himself, but he's also a scholar on Buddhism. And he's just a fascinating man. He's a wonderful man. I got to meet him when I first was taking Tokudo, a novice ordination. Steph and Margaret wanted me to visit and spend some time at Zen Center of Los Angeles. And so I did. And Red Pine was the artist in residence at that time at ZCLA. And so I was very fortunate to each day that I was there hear a talk by Red Pine. And it was when he had just come out with his book on the Heart Sutra. And he is so authentic. He is so close to the bone that when that book got published and he got his first royalty check, he was excited because he could pay back the county in Oregon where he lived for the public assistance they had given him to live on, So he was like right close to the bone. and he had this little bag that he carried, and he'd kind of throw it over his shoulder, and off he'd go walking around LA. You could just see he was like this wandering Taoist in the midst of, a major American city. He's just somebody that I find delightful. Anyway, so this is a talk by Red Pine, and his talk is called China, Taoism, Buddhism, and its Hermits. So some overlap with the amongst the white clouds. But I think it would really be fun and really informative when we're talking about the roots of our practice to go to visit these two videos. Red Pines is a little shorter. It's about an hour. And so I would think 1 week we'll watch Amongst the White Clouds next week, and then the following week, Red Pine, or maybe in the reverse order. I'm going to look at them again and kind of see what makes most sense contextually. That sound okay to folks? I mean, this is the roots. These is what when we're doing the koans and so on, we're very offer encountering some of the major Tang Dynasty teachers, people like Matsu, Great Master Ma, and Nanchuan. These guys had temples with 1,000 students, 1,500 students. They were huge. And then at the other end, you had somebody like Chao Chou, who we also greatly love in this lineage, who had a tiny rural temple where the walls were falling down, and famous story about Chao Chou is that he had a little three-legged stool, and one of the legs broke, and so he grabbed a piece of firewood, tied it on, and stool fixed. That he was another kind of close to the bone guy. He did, material possessions did not affect him at all. So in a funny way, you had these kind of and they all got along. I mean, Chao Chou was Nanchuan's student. Nanchuan was Great Master Matsu's student. They were a lineage together, and yet so very different. So what we often see is the flashier, better known, bigger kinds of expressions of Zen. But there were also these very simple ones. So that's kind of, looking at our history. As you probably know, but I'm going to go over it a little bit again, is that first off, what we now call Zen originated in India. And it was already establishing itself as a stream within Indian Buddhism that was then taken to China by Bodhidharma. And Bodhidharma's life may or may not be very mythical. Some of the things I just can't think aren't mythical, like his cutting off his eyelids and not sleeping for 8 years and that sort of thing. But he also is probably an actual historical figure. And there's a scholar, Andy Ferguson, who went to China and followed what the path that Bodhidharma was alleged to have followed in China and the places that he visited. And he found historical evidence for Bodhidharma's presence in those places. So whether he did these quasi-miraculous things or not, and lived in a cave for 8 years and cut off his eyelids and all of that, who knows? But probably didn't do that. But he was a real guy. And again, with or not, he was supposedly in his 80s when he traveled from India to China and lived to the age of 120, which speaks a lot to cutting off your eyelids. Might be something in that. But anyway, but his teachings and his life formed the basis in China of Zen. and what in China became known as Chan, which was somewhat of a fusion between the more classical Buddhism that Bodhidharma brought from India and the Taoism that was indigenous to China. So Chan is Buddhism under the influence of Taoism, and that's something I think we'll hear more about from Red Pine in particular. Very different, many similarities between Buddhism and Taoism and many differences. And, one of the classic stories that I tell is that, when things got particularly oppressive in China, the Taoists used to descend from the mountains and lead the peasants in a revolt. And therefore, governments of China to this very day fear the Taoists, and Taoism is fairly repressed in China, even by the current regime. Whereas the Buddhists, they kind of sat in their monasteries and did their thing. So China has been more okay with Buddhism because Buddhists didn't lead revolts. And that's interesting, and that becomes a very interesting sort of contemporary question, which I'm not going to engage with today. But it's this. As we have more socially engaged Buddhism, that's not our history. That's not our tradition, as such, and to the same extent that it was to the Taoists. Of course, their idea of social engagement was cutting off heads. Yeah, a little extreme, but and I think we therefore, I think we Zen Buddhists, even in this age, are very awkward about social justice engagement. Very awkward about it, and other groups do a far better job. So while we have socially engaged Buddhism, environmentally engaged in Zen, I think we're clumsy. We could talk about that another time. Anyway. So over our history, there's a book called Crazy Clouds. Any people read Crazy Clouds? It's called, the subtitle is Zen Rebels, Radicals, and Reformers. And the basic premise of the Crazy Clouds book is that throughout history, as conditions have changed, particularly Zen teachers have adapted Zen in a response to the times. So that Zen has not been a static thing, but that various teachers at various times, through their understanding of skillful means, have engaged in different ways. And I think that's a very important aspect of our history to consider. That Zen is something that's extremely malleable in response to the times and the conditions and the people and the places where it is. And we've seen that already in this culture, where Zen in many ways looks radically different than it did in Japan. And now, of course, we have the back pollination. So Japanese Zen is starting to be impacted by American Zen. So it's not static. Nor should it be, nor would it be. We have these things, Eightfold Noble Path, and we have precepts, and we have all of these things. But they're not a canon. They're not a body of rules that all, if you're a Zen Buddhist, then you've got to believe in the Eightfold Noble Path. No, nobody says that. You may or you may not. It's completely up to you. And it's completely up to each teacher how they frame the Dharma and how relatively important they see each of these aspects. That's our history. our history is one of transformation. Our history is one of responding to the times through the skillful means of each teacher. Because in Zen, again, there is no hierarchy. We don't have bishops. We don't have cardinals and popes. We don't, each teacher is essentially autonomous to teach as they see fit, to express the Dharma as they see fit. There are no rules that everyone has to adhere to, either teachers or students. And personally, I think that's one of the most important and beautiful aspects of Zen. That is this constantly emerging, constantly creative force. And if we had 50 Zen teachers in the room together, we might all see certain things differently. And yet, the core of our teachings, our essential understanding of the Dharma would probably be the same. I just think that's both wonderful and fascinating. Okay, so going to go back to Amongst the White Clouds. So the Amongst the White Clouds follows the lives of a group of hermit monks, and I believe nuns also, living in remote mountainous area in China. So virtually completely cut off from the outside world. And what I think is most interesting about that, for me at least, is that their practice, their lives are kind of stripped bare of any artifice. They have reduced it down to the least common denominator, in that they live in an extraordinarily simple way, and they practice in an extraordinarily simple way. So, as you'll see when we watch the video, what their day typically consists of is getting up. I don't know. I think they do some sitting in the morning. And then they start their chores, their life for the day. They make their meals, they work in the garden, they put up food, they cut firewood, the classic chop wood, carry water. That's what they're doing almost all day, chop wood, carry water. And then in the evening, they come together and they have, as a little community, and they have a little Buddhist service together. That's what their practice consists of. And I think that's what, when we reduce Zen to its least common denominator, those are the essential elements. This is the part I wanted to suggest you make some notes about. So I have come down to what I think are the 5 essential elements for Zen practice. And they all begin with the letter S. I don't know why that is. Okay. And they're very similar. I'll talk a little bit later about the eco-spiritual stuff I'm working on. But anyway, so they're very similar to, I have 4 S's that I say are essential to eco-spiritual practice. And these are 5 S's for Zen. So the first of these 5 S's is solitude. Now, those monks and nuns achieve solitude by going way back in the mountains, beyond roads, beyond whatever. Obviously, I won't say it's not anything that any of us are going to do, but it's probably improbable, right? We are all, to greater or lesser extent, thoroughly entangled in the world, in our lives or our families, in careers, all of those things. So what does solitude mean? to me, it's a relative term. I say this when I'm teaching eco-spirituality as well. We can't all go off into the North Maine woods and live in a log cabin. But we can each in our lives carve out as much solitude as possible. And that might be as simple as going to a room where everybody else in the house isn't. Going out in the garden where everybody else isn't at that time. Going for a walk on a quiet street. I mean, it may not be, and probably more often than not, is not going to be going deep into the woods. Although that's a nice way to experience solitude. It's I'm going to do it this afternoon, but it's not necessary. And for most people, impossible, especially on a daily basis. So again, it might be just within our house, finding the space where solitude is available to us, where we can be alone and not embroiled in a whole lot of stuff. The second S is a close cousin of solitude, which is silence. That we have opportunities for quiet. Opportunities where we're not speaking and where others aren't speaking to us. Opportunities where music isn't playing constantly. Opportunities where Fox News isn't playing constantly. You know, I say that only half joking because, you know, there's a lot of households in this country that never turn off the television. Never turn off the television. And whether, you know, if it's right-wing folks, they got Fox News. If it's left-wing folks, they got CNN. But one way or another, that noise is going 24/7. Right? So silence, we need to cultivate silence. We can't have inner silence unless we have outer silence. The two are closely related. The third S is sitting. Sitting zazen, which integrates with those other two, is very important. Interestingly enough, and we can talk about this when we watch it, the monks in Among the White Clouds don't sit a lot. You think, oh, they're sitting all day. No, they're not. They're gardening all day. You know, they're working all day. So they have transformed all of those aspects of their lives into their practice. Okay. But for us, I think sitting is good. I mean, and necessary. You know, they can in part do that because their lives are so uncomplicated and have so few entanglements, and they can therefore really, you know, immerse themselves in each moment. We rarely have the opportunity to do that, so we need to go someplace and close the door and sit. The next thing is simplicity. Again, a relative term. I'm not suggesting like that each of you, like Layman Pong, throw all your possessions into the river and go off as wandering monks. But the more complex our lives are, the more distractions we have, the less able we are to stay grounded in the fundamental reality. So again, what does simplicity mean? It's going to mean something different for every one of us. But generally speaking, it's going to mean having as few possessions as we can comfortably have. And that's going to be a very different thing for each one of us. It's going to mean having as few involvements and entanglements as we can. And of course, we are the first generation that has to face the electronic madness. It's very hard to have a simple life when you have 200 emails a day, which I happen to have. And it's quite disturbing to me, actually. And so it's also kind of how do we limit all the electronic discourse that we enter into, which crosses over into solitude, silence, right? Simplicity. What is there in our life that we don't need, that we can set aside, that we can do without? And of course, there's a large ecological component to that as well. Okay, and the final one is sangha, is community, is this. And even those monks and nuns in the remote mountains have sangha. They come together, they do a service together. They're not living in complete isolation. Their community is very small, but they live in community. They visit one another. They spend time with one another. They spend time together doing a service and so on. Sangha. So important to help us sustain our paths, to sustain our practice, sustain our lives. Without others, we can get so easily lost in this world. Okay, so when we are practicing these 5 things, what are we doing? What are we cultivating? Well, I also have 5 things there, but they don't all begin with S. Maybe if I work at it, I could do it. But and these are not surprising. We talk about some of these a lot. The first one is compassion. We're cultivating compassion. And compassion is really responding to the suffering of others, of other beings, whether they're human or more than human. Loving kindness, and in some ways, very closely aligned with compassion. And I can sometimes see it as sort of the working of compassion. Compassion is what I have. Loving kindness is what I give as a result. Right? And it'll dovetail with another one. The third one is authenticity. Taking off our masks, our pretenses, our posing in whatever ways, and being genuinely who we are. I might say being real, being authentic. And the next one is generosity of spirit. Generosity of spirit. And generous spirit, I mean, it overlaps a lot with loving kindness and compassion. It's being open. It's being present to others and the needs of others and the world and whatever comes to us. Whatever comes to us. And projecting that here we are. We're available. We're not islands unto ourselves. We are participants in the web of life, of community. And the final one is lightness of being. Not taking the whole damn thing too seriously. Smiling, laughing, having a little fun. You know, I think as Zen practitioners, we have a tendency to be overly serious. And there are moments, there are times when being serious is completely appropriate, and there's other times when laughter and frivolity are completely appropriate, right? And so it's being willing to include all of those, all of it. lightness of being, and sharing that. We talk about these as hard times. They are hard times. And there are many, many extremely upsetting things going on, as we all know. But we also need to leave room for some lightness, for some humor, for some smiling, for some hugging, for all of those sorts of things. Because if we don't have that, what's our practice worth? You know, we're not doing all this just to be miserable. We don't have to do this to be miserable. We can do that without practicing. So that's it. This moment, that's what I think Zen in the 21st century is and needs to be. And the practice that we have needs to support those things, both our individual practice and our collective practice as a sangha. So I'm going to stop there and see what thoughts you guys might have.
That was wonderful. But one thing I noticed that as part of the Zen practice, you don't include things like koan work, and clearly we do. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I don't. You're right. I don't. But I'm trying to look at the essentials of the cart. Koan practice is not an essential of the cart. There are people sitting shikantaza. There are people doing breath practice. Sitting is the essential. The exact practice that we do when we sit can vary. I mean, that said, I love koans, and as many of you know, and I think they're a very powerful practical practice tool. But to me, they're not integral to Zen in the same way that it's the sitting, it's the practice that's the essential.
My question, Peter, because we hear it so much, where is Kensho or enlightenment, which some of us try to seek, some may find? It's such a sticky wicket for many of us. And there are teachers who really push for it. And you haven't mentioned it, to my pleasure, but I'd like to know why.
I forgot that. You mentioned it. Yeah, that's what. No, why do I mention? Well, first of all, I mean, I would assume that most of the teachers who really push it are Rinzai teachers, because in Rinzai, it's a much stronger push than it is in Soto. Everybody is working towards realization, but in Rinzai, the old thing where they at a session, they sit outside and howl moo all night long, pushing to have a breakthrough, that kind of thing. And in Soto, we don't do that. And so part of that difference is the Soto Rinzai difference. But, this is one of those places that I agree with, what's his name, Brad, doesn't matter, teacher that's online a lot, Brad, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, Warner. One of the things Warner, thank you. Yeah, Brad Warner. So one of the things she says, I agree with, Kensho is not something we can plan on. It may or may not happen, and it happens in its time. We can practice sincerely, but Kensho is going to do what it's going to do, right? And therefore, having that as an object just becomes another sort of attachment. It's this sort of elusive butterfly that we've got to go chasing, rather than focusing on the compassion and the other things that the world needs right now. Now, this is probably a radical point of view from traditional Zen, where I probably do differ radically with many teachers. I mean, I think I've said this before. I don't care about Kensho. I care about compassion and loving kindness. If you're manifesting that, you're manifesting Zen. Does Kensho, is it valuable? Yes. Is it important? Yes. Does it change our perspective to some extent? Yes. But the fact is, if we're living the Dharma and we're practicing these things, we're manifesting Kensho. So that's why I didn't mention it. It's an elusive butterfly. We don't need to go chasing it. Let's just sit here and do something good for the world.
Peter, what about equanimity and not getting overwhelmed by whatever? Where does that fall?
Well, I probably didn't mention it because I don't have any. And equanimity is a little bit like Kensho. It has this sort of life of its own. And if we seek it, it's gone, right? We have it in moments of clarity. If we are doing these things, solitude, silence, simplicity, and so on and so forth, we're going to have times of equanimity. Just a given. We don't have to seek equanimity, and we can't seek equanimity. It's like singing Kensho, right? The closer we go to it, the further it goes away from us. But if we're living, these monks, again, we watch these monks in the mountains, they have incredible equanimity. Why? Because they're just living their lives. They're hoeing their garden. They're preparing their lunch, and the equanimity arises out of that. And so far as I'm concerned, it's not a thing to pursue or cultivate. We pursue or cultivate our practice, and these things emerge for us.
So to follow up, or I guess to clarify for myself. So I saw the first 5 things. That's sort of the practice that then begets the 5 things that you mentioned after: the compassion, loving kindness, etc. So you'd see equanimity as part of the result, quote unquote, but not quite like compassion, loving kindness, just kind of a byproduct, as it were?
Yes, I see it as a byproduct.
Okay.
It's interesting, that Treetop gets a lot of inquiries from people who want to start practicing there. And so I see those, and people often say introducing themselves, and I'd like to learn how to be peaceful. Well, so I don't answer those. I just see them. But my answer would be, then don't even get near Zen. It's not these peaceful drugs. We have something called heroin that's good if you want to be peaceful. Zen drags us into the mud. And when horror is taking place in Gaza, we feel horror, right? I mean, what is being peaceful? But the equanimity or the peacefulness arises because we're not resisting those things, right? Life has pain, life has suffering, life has terrible things. And if we live with those things and we endure those things, we are not suffering. But if we fight them, if we resist them, that's where the suffering arises. That's what the fundamental teaching of the Buddha is, right? It's not that life is suffering, it's that resistance is suffering. And shit happens in life, stuff we don't like, right? We can't change that. That's a reality. So, of course, if we live that and practice that, we do find some peacefulness. But it's like all these other things. We don't find peacefulness by seeking peacefulness. We find peacefulness by just living our lives and not resisting.
I was wondering about, I was expecting to hear realization of our true nature, which maybe is close to Kensho. I don't really know. And perhaps authenticity would be part of realizing our true nature. Or maybe that's just another byproduct of the first 5 essential elements.
Okay. So I'm going to tell you all how to realize your true nature today.
Good.
Right? What time is it now? 11:10. So about an hour from now, when you prepare lunch, just prepare lunch, and your true nature will be revealed. And I'm being silly, but our true nature is constantly revealed again when we're not resisting, when we're not living in the complex thought narratives that we create and encircle our lives with, when we're just there, when we're just living. Yeah, that's why I keep coming back to those hermit monks. They're just living, and I don't know if they even know it. I think they do. I think we'll see, particularly the elder monks. But it's that paradox that that the path is the destination, right?
So
We're
our
not going
true,
anyplace. What's that?
so our true nature would be living our lives fully without the distraction of that little voice in our heads that's taking us here and there and the other.
Well, yeah, that little voice is part of our true nature also.
Well, that's true.
Obviously, but but to a certain extent, it's anytime the I is not in the equation, right? If I'm fully engaged in living and doing whatever it is, then the I is not present. The observing ego, the ego that's measuring and gauging and shaping and all those things that were just there or fully engaged without a whole cognitive framework, a whole narrative to support it. And that's one of the contexts in which simplicity helps, because the more simply we're living, the less tendency we're going to have to be involved in ways that cause us to construct the narratives. Complexity leads to complex narratives and leads to, that's why fundamentally we want Zen to be as simple as possible, because we're trying to shed that. We're not trying to create a new narrative, the Zen narrative, but we do that very well. Especially in this culture.
So it's almost like the practice is, for instance, the 5 things that you list initially. And then it's almost like the others, the compassion, loving kindness. It's almost like you take a sneak peek every once in a while on the path to encourage yourself, which is a looking at yourself, which is a kind of cultivating, but you don't want to, make a complex story about that you're cultivating these things, but it's like a loving kindness towards yourself to say, oh, I see this blooming. In other words, it feels like it's a similar kind of thing. It's like you don't want to chase them, but you can bless them. Does that make any sense? It's like you stick to just allowing the blooming by shedding various types of noise, and I'll just use the word mishigas, the extraneous.
I think, yes, I'm totally distracted by this, that this thumbs up thing kept appearing over your head while you were talking. Is that like a spirit coming into the circle here or something? I don't know why that happened, but anyway, did other people see it or did I just imagine it? No, yeah, some people saw it. Daniel saw it. So
I saw
those
it.
of us with the true clear vision saw us, and the rest of you, but anyway, that's what I was just talking about. But yes, what you're saying is exactly, a lot of these things cannot be perfectly executed, but they can be held lightly. And sometimes, we need to think sometimes. If we didn't think at all, we'd like crash into walls, right? I mean, and then we let it go, we pick something up and then we put it down. So we constrict the space a little and then we reopen the space. We walk back into it. It's a dance, right? It's a dance.
We infuse, it's almost like infusing intention and then letting it go. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, exactly. It's exactly that.
Okay.
And holding it, even when we're infusing it, we're holding it lightly, but it's there, and we, and then we let it go. So it's not the narrative that defines our lives. It's like you say, it's an intention, or it's and sometimes a reminder. I don't talk much about mindfulness because mindfulness has become a fetish in this culture, and it's become a thing. It's like it's like an integral good. Like being mindfulness is good. No, being mindfulness isn't good. Paying attention is valuable sometimes. And there's a difference. It's not an inherent good, but it's very valuable in kind of knowing what our intentions are, where we're going, when I'm failing to be compassionate. If I'm not mindful, I don't know that, right? So I've got to have that thread of attention going also. But again, it's a thread. It's a light thing. I'm not all day like, oh, what are my thoughts right now? What are my thoughts right now? What are my thoughts right now? But there's a kind of an awareness. Oh, when I spoke with that person, I was not as generous of spirit as I should have been. I was not as open and kind as I should have been. So I need to have, awareness has a place, and then I let it go. Or I try to. Sometimes I don't do so well at letting it go. That's the other thing. It's all process. It's like the precepts. We fail at the precepts every day. Or at least I will speak for myself. I fail at the precepts every day. That's I hadn't thought about that before. I'm going to create a new set of precepts that I can actually keep. I vow to take up the way of eating too much. I vow to take up the way of sleeping in the morning. I think I think I could do really well at those precepts, but the ones we have, not so much, right? But it's coming back to your word, Deborah, intention. My intention is to keep the precepts. And where mindfulness comes in is, oh, Peter, you just blew that. You didn't, that was an important moment to keep the precept. Oh, so maybe the next time I'm more likely to keep it and not to ignore it. And it's a dance, right? It's a dance. In and out, in and out. And again, back to the lightness of being. Part of the lightness of being is being aware that we're going to fall short consistently, and therefore not getting into shaming and blaming ourselves or, castigating ourselves. Okay, I'm trying. I have good intention. Sometimes I don't do so well. So the next time I'm going to try to do better. And that's, constant process, not outcome.
Kind of goes along with the idea of living your life and being the aliveness is in the breathing in and out.
Yeah. And where does the joy come from?
Right.
We need joy in our lives. We need happiness. There's nothing wrong with happiness. I mean, Dalai Lama talks about that as one of the most fundamental human desires that's universal to all cultures everywhere on earth. Everybody wants to be happy. Right? Nothing wrong with happiness. We're not Puritans. But I think Zen can tend that way sometimes.
Yep.
Speaking of those things, so my phone just lit up. State of emergency. Looks like Iceland is about to have a major volcanic eruption and they're evacuating people as fast as possible. That's what the world is doing. I mean, these things arise constantly. They're part of our lives. And hopefully, see, in Iceland, people are ridiculously sane. And when somebody says the volcano is about to explode, they don't go, oh, fake news. That's the Democrats again. They get their asses out of there, So hopefully people will be safe there. Any final thoughts? So we're going to come to this a bunch. So next week at 10 o'clock, we will pop on Amongst the White Clouds, and then we'll have a little discussion after that. And depending whether we watch the whole thing or not, maybe going a little longer. And then the following week, we will have Red Pine speaking to us. And I hope this is from 2018. I just love this man. He's such a refreshing human being, and I hope that will come through in the video. I haven't seen that video myself yet, but
If you look around, there are interviews with him, in which interviews that are, I've only heard audios of his stumbling into studying Chinese. His whole history is very, very interesting. He's an interesting guy.
Yes, and he's completely, when we talk about authenticity, he is completely authentic, you know. He was walking around LA, wandering through the mountains. I mean, it was so, you know, his little satchel over his shoulder. It was beautiful. He's a very free spirit.
But we're going to meditate first.
Well, that's a question, I think, because if we meditate first, we're going to be going till well past the noon hour potentially. So that's up to you guys.
Now, Gary, you guys, I don't think you've been here, or I don't know if you were informed or told, but we've been starting to sit an hour earlier for those that want to. So it might be a good Sunday to, if you can make it earlier, then you still have the opportunity to sit for an hour. If you can't, then we start with the movie, just as a thought / suggestion.
Yeah, they have the 3 hour time difference, though.
I
so
know.
it's
Yeah.
kind of-
People are sitting, forgive me, because sitting for an hour. So half an hour, a little break, half an hour, and then joining.
No, we start, so my time, so forgive me because I know you're, but so it starts 9 o'clock here,
Yes.
which is an hour earlier, and we go for 55 minutes. You log on, and
Yeah.
if you step away whenever works for you, whether 20
Nice.
minutes, 30 minutes, whatever, you just, mute it, mute your camera, turn your screen off, go do your thing, and then come back however long or short.
Nice.
And then 5 minutes before 10, then we take a quick break so everybody can step away. And then at 10 o'clock, we start the normal sitting. But if we're going to do the movie, then it might be worth kind of tweaking that for next week.
Wonderful.
What do people think? That one option would be just that we would sit 20 minutes before 10 and then start the video at 10. And the before 10 would be, well, it's all optional. No, I've got this stick, but I can't reach any of you, so you can do whatever you want. But anyway, yeah, so you'd have the option. If you want to come and sit for 20 minutes before 10, we'll be doing that. There are a group of us who start at 9, but as RJ just applied, it's very informal. When we sit at 9, you can come, you can go, you can turn your camera off and go to the bathroom, get a drink of water, whatever you need to do. And so it's a kind of informal hour. So what do we have some sort of a consensus?
I think I agree with the plan that the documentary starts at 10 and anyone who wants to sit can come in anytime beforehand or by themselves afterwards maybe. But I think starting at 10 makes a lot of sense since it's as long as it is.
Yeah, and we may not watch the whole thing. I mean, again, it's kind of sort of, we'll see our level of engagement if it's proving to be worthwhile. I've seen it several times, but I haven't seen this version. It looks to me like they've been improving it first came out in 2005 or around then, and it was very crude. It was kind of, basically it was this college student who went with his video camera into the mountains and shot video. But I think that since then, they've really polished it up. It's got like high ratings on as a documentary. So I haven't even seen it in this incarnation, but. Okay, I think we have a plan. And I think we have some vows to say.
Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it.
Yeah, one final thought. Margaret asked that question about Kensho. And years ago, this is sort of lost in the mists of the past in my mind, but there was a monk in Japan who had been practicing a really long time. I mean, he was sort of at almost notoriety because he had been practicing whatever it was, 30 or 40 years, and he had never had Kensho. And people sort of felt sorry for this guy. Like, this poor guy, he's been practicing all these years and he's never had Kensho. And someplace I saw a video of him, and he's sweeping the leaves on the monastery patio or whatever it is with this perfect, deep attention, fully engrossed, living his life. What was he missing? And in fact, I imagine that he probably had Kensho, but he didn't have the kind of dramatic, sudden Kensho that he had. There's both things. There's sudden and gradual. And gradual can often be quite subtle. Doesn't mean it isn't happening. Doesn't mean that the same outcome at the end. But it's like you don't get the volcano. So I also suspect he might well have experienced that from all of his years in practice. But what was he missing? Okay. Thank you all.
Today is the day that we have set aside for our social gathering.
Oh, merriment.
Merriment, joy. Gary and Deborah, if you're going to be here for a little bit, I'd love to hear about your trip.
Yeah, we want the slideshow.
Deborah is stepping away. She will be back.
Don't mean to cut out anyone else who wants to speak up socially.
I will say, with Deborah not being there, that for me, the sort of coolest aspect was surprisingly Hanoi. Because I was growing up of an age where I was afraid of getting drafted and everything, and Hanoi was like Mordor, and now it's so alive and colorful and happy. And at night it's all lights and there are kids out, and it's just a really beautiful place with a fantastic spirit, and so I really enjoyed being here. That was we took we were in a group, and we all took I forget what they're called, the three-wheel, sometimes they're called tuk-tuks or something, the three-wheel thing where somebody's pedaling, and it's like a taxi but somebody's pedaling around, and we did that for an hour on the streets of Hanoi, and there there are all these motorbikes, they're like low power motorcycles, but there are many more of them than cars, where they're streaming around you and going in all directions and everything. It's just, I don't know. It's just amazing. I recommend going if you ever get a chance.
So for me, I knew intellectually, but I didn't really understand how much guilt, angst, horror, uh, puzzlement, confusion, the whole thing about Vietnam. I mean, this was our generation. To my mind, it destroyed a generation of our country. And I've never known how to metabolize it. And why it happened. I could never understand what the hell happened. Saying, and I feel some kind of clarity and compassion and some level of bizarrely some level of closure around the craziness that my heart is obviously, God forbid, for all of us, we're seeing hell again now very clearly. But this kind of gives context in a bizarre way. And again, it felt like my own personal sequestration of a very serious, suffering and some kind of release of that being there. So what I saw is that my experience of the Vietnamese that I got to hang out with was, brilliant, life, um, celebrating and aspiring. People are happy because they can eat more than a little bit of rice. People kept saying that over and over
Apparently
again.
the economy's really improved a lot in the last 10, 20 years. And sort of the result is people are just happy. It's really notable, that people are smiling and happy.
And they're very clear when you get to speak to people privately that it's a communist, corrupt regime that they're under.
It's a corrupt regimen,
It's corrupt.
but not.
It's not.
But
So it's not.
some people will say it is not communist at all.
No,
anymore.
it's not taking care of people. I mean, we can get into
it
that
doesn't.
whole. We can get
You
into
have to
that.
buy your own health insurance. You're not guaranteed a job or anything. It's hard to see any elements of
It's very
actual
controlled.
communism in it, but it's run by a Politburo.
There literally are what are these things called, the speakers? You can see the speakers like in the old fashioned days that we used to see speakers, blaring emergency, emergency. The speakers in the streets have a blaring of inescapable blaring of the news. So the population gets to hear the news, and the news is tempered to the geography for the speakers to blare the news that's titrated for that population, mandated that population hear that particular news. And everybody sees it and everybody knows it. Or God forbid, maybe some people don't realize quite, how severe that is, blah, blah, blah. So that's all happening.
It's authoritarian.
It's an authoritarian state. But at the same time, the ebullience, I'm not even trying to say the word, and it's a very young country. So you see, like in Hanoi, all these kids and just a vibrancy of unsuppressible energy and joy anyway. But the mantra that we kept hearing repeated, I could go on for too long. I'm sorry. I'll stop.
I will say that.
Can I just say, I'm sorry. So the mantra is, we are eating now. We are eating now. And we are so grateful, grateful, grateful. And we don't, you know, there are mentionings of hope that things could change, and da 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 da. But the predominant feeling is, wow, we have, you know, more than just rice, water.
With respect to the war, and they're thinking about the United States, there is complexity, there are layers in it, but by and large, they are truly completely over it. And uh, they actually view the United States as a friend. China is the enemy, and the United States is a friend, and the United States is giving them economic opportunities. You know, I think Apple is actually manufacturing stuff in Vietnam now, so you know they have jobs and stuff that they wouldn't have had otherwise. We Some of those jobs are the kinds of things that we criticize because people are working extremely long hours and very low pay, and we as Americans tend to criticize, and we as a group were talking to one of the guides and sort of expressing that kind of feeling, and she was like, you know, dismissive, you know, was what I figured. She just like, you know, she was like rolling her eyes pretty much because the difference is that they have jobs and they can eat as opposed to not having that. So from their perspective, what we say is like bad and criminal and stuff is actually a purely good thing compared to what existed before and is behind the fact that they're smiling all the time.
Very, very
Yeah, so
enlightening.
it's very fascinating, you know, and even just a little microcosm of it. We went through the Hanoi Hilton, you know, yet where John McCain was held for like 4.5 years or something as a prisoner, and there on the walls are picture is a picture of John McCain being there later when he visited as a senator, and they view him as somebody who has helped Vietnam. You know, so it's very, very interesting. And
Wow.
I don't know what else
We
to
could
say.
keep talking about
Yeah,
it. We probably shouldn't,
yeah.
but it was really beautiful and important for us. Um,
It sounds a little bit like maybe what our country experienced after World War II, that happiness to be home, happiness to be reunited, happiness to be out of the war.
Yeah.
yeah. But God forbid their story. Anyway, I'll stop. But you listen to the story of what the Vietnamese and the Laos and Cambodians, Jesus freaking Christ, constant colonization, constant wars, constant relentless taking over and ridiculous for many, many, many centuries. I mean, millennia of episodic continual
Yeah, it
halt.
seems like now maybe the best period they've had in centuries.
Oh, I mean, I read about that. You know, you read history, and it's like, okay, yeah, why you fall asleep because it's the same freaking thing. Anyway, so we come back and we see crazy world again, human condition, and different views of how you live a life, how you can live a life.
Cambodia is not doing as well. You know, they still have strong memories of the Khmer Rouge and it's a little different there.
But did you enjoy your trip overall? Did you have a good time?
Yes,
Yes. Okay.
yes, yes. And
Yeah.
one of the things I learned at age 66, it was honest, just talking turkey here. It's like am I being a bourgeois piggy person to go get, of course, we all know about getting on a plane and all the rest of it. It's like, I have the privilege and the money to go somewhere else. And what the fuck am I doing? And the reality is, for me, it was, it was enlightening. I don't mean that in the, but it was a real gift and wonderful. Yeah. Very pollinating, cross-pollinating, refreshing. You know, we're lucky enough as human beings now that we can, um, you know, mingle in the broad craziness of this human experience. I'm just saying, and um, and being somewhere else in person is different. It's, you know, it's a real blessing. I understand it's fraught with questions, but it's a real blessing.
You know, I had a very good friend who was special forces in Vietnam, and then he was shot twice and captured and spent 3 years in a POW camp and was tortured. I mean, he told me some of the things that happened to him in the POW camp and all that. And we were once talking about it and about the fact that vets were going back to Vietnam. He said he would go in a minute. He loved Vietnam. He loved the Vietnamese people. He held them absolutely no malice. But he couldn't financially afford it. But he would have said he would have gone. You know, it was a time when McCain and others were going over. You know, and if the books by Edward Tick is a depth psychologist, a Jungian who's been working with vets for over 20 years and taking them to Vietnam. That's what a big part of his work has been, is taking Vietnam veterans back to Vietnam. And he described the experiences they've had there are universally positive. And you know, Vietnamese soldiers who were their sworn enemies, they're hugging and they're kissing, and you know, just crazy. You know, they have healed in a way that we barely understand.
Really, yes. Yes. Big deal.
And Buddhism is actually a major thing. You know, I don't think they are sitting. You know, I don't think they're doing something like Zazen, but the whole approach of compassion and kindness being very, very important seems to be a really present thing in their culture.
Yeah, most Buddhism in Southeast Asia is devotional Buddhism.
Yeah.
And so the monks are the ones who do the practice, but everybody else goes and makes offerings at the temple and that sort of thing.
But I just have to say, so because education is so expensive, a way for the young ones to get an education is to go into the monastery. There are lots of little ones getting their education through the monastery, and then at age 12 or 13, they make a decision about whether they want to stay in the monkhood or whatever you would call it, or go into, you know, go into the broader world. But it's flexible. We met monks who had been in that system for longer. One of our guides, I think he left the sangha or whatever one would call it at like age 21 or 22, was offered to be a chief, whatever. But so it's a fluid system, but a lot of exposure in youth to a lot of the Buddhist education as well as secular education.
No public schools, no public elementary schools.
They're expensive.
You actually
you have to pay.
You have to pay for your kid to go to
They're
school.
quote unquote
Yeah.
mandated.
Yeah, it's
but it's not
funded,
enforced, and you can't freaking pay for it. So the kids go to the monastery. if the parents can spare them. I mean, that's not trivial either.
Right.
Kind of interesting, but it is what it is.
I want to know who's doing the special effects.
Yeah, I
I don't
know.
know.
Oh, you
that.
see
I
what
saw some confetti coming down.
Confetti came down,
Yeah.
and the thumbs up. I was like, really?
I think, Gary, I don't know, but it looks like you're still taping. So I'm wondering if you can actually go back and maybe see as you're replaying it in the future to see if you can tell, because it almost seems like it's I don't want to say AI, but it seems like it's automated because it only happens to you guys.
I think put it in our computer.
And I think it
I
only happens to Deborah. I'm not sure. Oh, yeah, I've seen the
yes,
little thumbs
yes,
up with Gary, but
yes. I think it's just Deborah every once in a while. And I'm as it's happening, I'm looking at the chat to see if somebody's doing it, and I cannot tell. So I think you have something in your system that just cheers you on there,
Yes.
Deborah.
It's not my birthday
Not
yet.
what I know of, but okay.
You never know with this one. Only don't know. Anyway, yeah.
Somewhat related, Gary, I was able to tape the last two talks.
Yay.
The first one, my computer crashed, so I couldn't, but the last two, I have my husband's. So I have it, and at some point I'll just need to get those to you, but at least we have the last two.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Wonderful.
So who took notes for the first one?
I don't think anybody did, unfortunately, because I was going to, and literally the system would just, my computer would just continually crash. So I apologize. I think that one might have been
and it was the best talk ever. It was
Yeah.
It was fabulous.
I think one of the things, and I don't know if it was on the first one, was that Peter was talking about the addition of the hour to every morning on the Sundays.
Okay.
And then he had also talked about possibly extending, I think it was once a month, maybe once a quarter, where we would extend it even more extended sitting period, and then possibly doing some semi-retreats and a possible like fly-in retreat.
Wow.
So those are still, I don't want to speak for Peter. I think those were kind of thrown out there to see the interest, but the hour prior to on Sundays has been happening, and personally I find it very beneficial.
Nice.
But,
I do too, and I like that we have a slow start, that it's,
yeah.
For me, it's kind of a lost hour, being up and around and waiting till 10. So I really like that hour of silence.
Yes, me too. It fit nicely with what
Just fits nicely.
with what you were
Yes.
talking about today, Peter.
Yes, simplicity. And so, Peter, you wanted feedback on those items. It's like more so than what you received today in the discussion, or was the discussion sufficient?
Well, it certainly helped. It might be more. I mean, I don't know if if they resonate with people, if they make sense. I'd like to hear that, or it might, if it's like, okay, well, these four sound really good, but this fifth one, or you just left out something really, like when people asked about Kent, when Margaret asked about Kento, that's a very legitimate question, so those kinds of things. I'd just like to refine this down a little bit. Lots of these things come in and out of my head, and they're very transient. But this is one that I'd like to codify a little bit and maybe make part of our collective understanding of practice and what it is in the Wild Fox mega sangha that we're forming. We might even get up to 10 people,
If it's written down and shared in some way, an article or just on the website or even in
Yeah, I'd like to see, this is partly inspired by you, Gary, and some of our conversations recently. I mean, I think, we are engaged in an active way in the evolution of Zen, and a lot of the things that I just talked about are heresy in some places, and others aren't, obviously, and many other people are moving the same directions that we are. But I think it's good to codify it from time to time as part of that process.
If it's written publicly, I feel like it would be helpful to state why Kensho is not included. It's the kind of question that a lot of people would have in mind and just wonder, maybe a couple other things stating why they're not included.
Yeah, well, I think it's a good idea. Both what's in and what's not in, and why. That could be helpful. I mean, as if nothing else, it could just be a trigger for discussion and debate, and kind of. But I certainly think that the form of Zen, not universally, but in some places, is changing, and I think it the more sort of intentional that is, I think the better the process will be.
Well, I like the simplicity of it, and the fact that one of them is simplicity, and that is so different than form is emptiness, emptiness is form, more esoteric subjects of Zen Buddhism. This is just real life. So I liked it.
Is part of the purpose, Peter, as well, kind of given us specifically wall foxes an identity, or is it just, your thoughts in general? How is that even in, I don't know, because it to me, putting it as a list or putting it on a website, etc., it sort of also gives us an identity, for better or worse, I'm not sure, to say, this is who we are, for someone who's looking, somebody who's trying to understand, or is that just kind of a byproduct?
No, I think we're on that road. I mean, we've had very preliminary discussions, we being the Shusos and I, about having a Wild Fox webpage. We don't currently. We have an affiliate page on the Treetop site, but we don't have anything that's standing alone. And that might be the kind of declaration that we want on a webpage that says, okay, here's what Wild Fox Zen is, and if you resonate with that, you might be interested in sitting with us. And if you think, oh, this is crazy, well, move on, So I do see it having that kind of purpose ultimately, as helping define us and define what practices in this sangha.
I have to say, this is maybe a little strange to say, but I just had the thought that it's almost like maybe you don't necessarily want, this is kind of bizarre, but to say it, it's almost like these things can sneak up on you if you start with relationship with you, for instance, our sangha, basic premises of Zen, Buddhism, the treasures, and just sitting, because things like simplicity kind of unfold, silence, solitude. I'm just saying, if I when I had my breast cancer, just going there for a minute, and started sitting with Gary just because he was sitting and I wasn't going to be left out of anything. That's the only, I mean, that's how I ended up with Zendo. It's just, he's going through, why wouldn't I, damn it? But I'm not sure at that time if someone had said to me, well, what we stand for is, simplicity, silence, solitude. Honestly, I might have, with authenticity, said, that's not me, that's not me. And what has evolved is a me that actually in a lot of ways very closely approximates. I'm just saying, but So I'm not sure, I'm not sure that people's initial hook in, and I don't mean that in a crass way, but the welcoming of people who can experience this through practice, that they might initially, if they could identify those things as primary, I'm sorry I'm saying too much, but if they could experience these things as primary at the get-go, maybe they have already, so to speak, gotten further along the path. I'm just saying, we don't necessarily, I think we would want to be more inclusive of people who, it's just a thought.
Yeah, I feel differently.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like them, and I feel
I
like
love them. I think they're
they
wonderful.
people could see that and say, "Wow, that's interesting." And that might be really valuable.
I
Whole thing.
sorry, Gary. I was gonna say I kind of like I see your point, Deborah, but I think for somebody who is not familiar,
Yeah.
basically, who doesn't quite know who we are, who doesn't know who we stand, I think just in a very simple way for us to explain this is who we are. These are the things that we, I don't know, work on, focus again, just in a just very general. It might help them. It's not whether I'm this already or I'm not already, but these are the core values of this group of people, whether it's a goal or whether it's a practice or whatever. Hey, that feels right, that calls to me, that speaks to me. And so then they can decide. Because right now I was actually having a conversation with my husband, as a matter of fact, where I was trying to explain, well, there's treetop and then there's us, and we kind of practice over there, but we're kind of not. And we can, and he visited when I had the ceremony, when we were in the Jukai ceremony, he visited and he didn't quite get it. And so I was trying to explain to him who we were, as opposed to, he's like, so do they sit there, but do they not? And so it kind of got into I'm not sure that I could even explain it right, because it was sort of, we are, but we're not. And I don't know. I don't have to explain it to myself. I think I get, but it was so for somebody who's not us, as it were, it might perhaps help to just delineate it a little bit, just to explain it in very simple terms of who we are, who we stand for. Again, knowing, we are them too, as it were. I think it's completely my opinion, though, of course.
I could enter something here if I might. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Yes.
I came in pretty, I can't say highly practiced, but I'd meditated for a very long time and was a member of Shambhala Buddhism. And so was well practiced and meditated alone and have all of that. But I think my coming into the Sangha here has been almost perfect. And I'll tell you why, in a positive and negative way. We were warned, quote unquote, rather repeatedly that Zen Buddhism was very strict and structured and unforgiving, and that in an odd way kind of did harm because they were so rigid, and forgiveness was not really part of their of the credo or the practice. And so in coming to Portland here, and also it was very formal, and Peter has alluded to that too. There are sections or sects, branches of Zen Buddhism do practice that way, and that was very true, I felt, in Oregon. But coming here, I was looking for a group to practice with until I came onto the fact that Susan was a member of a group, and I was quite timid to join, and she knows this, I think, because I didn't want to enter into something where she had friendships, and it was we're part of a community here in a living group, and so I thought, well, maybe that would be disturbing, so I wanted to be very gentle about to see whether or not. In fact, it was her husband who finally said no. So I can contact her since we've been having breakfast together and so forth. But coming into it, I was very confused, and I talked with Susan about this. We went to a museum and we had some conversations. I said, well, I don't get this, and I don't get this, and she kind of gentled me talked me off the ridge here, coming back, and said, no, that really has been or could be the case, but that's not the case with what we are doing, what I am doing here, and what you'll find in Peter is all about as well. And so, and I had a little hard time. I still have a hard time getting onto the jargon, the descriptors. And I try to follow that as much as I can. But over the brief time that I've been here, what has happened is that gentle kind of introduction that Deborah was talking about has happened. I feel very comfortable. Peter has repeatedly, on and off in no formal way, talked about the fact that this approach is real life, and that it needs to be somewhat casual as well as serious. And I think those two can happen together. And so, so I feel like I've learned an awful lot, and it fits very much with who I am, what I wish to have. And the outpouring of this that Peter did today, to me, just seems so sound. It's all the food groups, that I would think are covered. And so I particularly like what Deborah said, but I also like, RJ, what you say. There's two things going on here. One of them is, well, the Congregationalists are what? Are they Protestant or Catholic? Well, they're this sect and they're this sect. And so you divide all of that down, and you kind of want to know laterally where you are. So there's an organizational structure that I'm still looking at a bit. I'm still a little confused, but that's out there. But you use some words, RJ, which I like, which is, these are the things we work on, which is a very soft way. This isn't nailed to the wall, or it's not on a plaque. It's that, this is what we're doing, is a very gentle introduction into how we get into the meaning of this and how we practice. So I guess I'm saying both things. I feel like I'm blessed in having come in it the way I have, and love the outline here as well. So I've learned a great deal. So, and now having talked about all of that, I'm late for a meeting. So I have to go away. But anyway, thank you all so very
Thanks,
much.
Cal.
Yeah.
Your perspective is interesting as someone recently.
Frankly, Cal, it's precisely why I'm doing this. And I don't want to hold you up, but because Zen runs that gamut. There's places where if you wiggle during sitting, you get screamed at, and so on. People who've been to places like Zen Mountain know that, and the ritual is very complex and very precise, and and so on and so forth. And so we're like way over here, and I think it's good people sort of, if they're looking for that, they're going to be very unhappy coming to Wild Foxes, So to me, it's kind of just a basic declaration of where we are in the spectrum, and it allows people to kind of have some discernment, where, but you did shatter my illusions of being like Martin Luther and pinning these to the door.
Well, true. As I understand it, all the news was nailed to the wall in those days. This just happened to be one of them. Anyway, thank you all so very much.
Have a good day.
Bye.
And I've got tickets to the symphony this afternoon.
So good. Well, everybody should go. We're going way over. But I think Cal put his finger right on it. From my sense, it's intention. Deborah used that word intention several times today. And I think these are not rules. These are not commandments. These are intentions. But they sort of do, to some extent, define who we are, as opposed to other places who have different intentions. And there's nothing wrong with that. If they want to have perfect ceremonies and wear perfectly pressed robes and on and on and on, that's their intention. It's just different.
Can I say something as the other Deborah?
Oh, yes.
I love being here, which is why I keep coming back. I love listening to all of you. And I think there's a reason why teachers go and set up their own sangha, their own take on the fundamentals, which I think are just so rock solid and so everyday, so ordinary. And so I want to thank you for being here. I go to Treetop, and that's in person, and that has its own value, but I love coming here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
We so are glad that you're here.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess we're saying goodbye. Everybody, have a lovely day.